In the sprawling landscapes of rural Texas, where vast cattle ranches stretch to the horizon and economic inequality can create desperate situations for struggling families, there are moments when moral courage meets human need in ways that transform entire communities. For some people, wealth brings responsibility that extends far beyond personal comfort, while for others, poverty can drive decisions that compromise everything they once held sacred. This is the story of Harrison Cole, a successful rancher whose financial empire had isolated him from the very community that made his prosperity possible, and 15-year-old Sofia Martinez, a brilliant young woman whose father's mounting debts had led him to consider an unthinkable transaction. When a desperate man's attempt to solve his financial crisis by selling his daughter met with one wealthy stranger's unexpected intervention, neither could have predicted how completely their encounter would reshape their understanding of family, responsibility, and what it truly means to invest in another person's future. Sometimes the most valuable transactions are the ones that can't be measured in dollars and cents, and sometimes the greatest wealth comes from recognizing that our success is meaningless unless we use it to lift others up. Before we dive into this remarkable story of moral intervention and life-changing generosity, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We love connecting with our viewers around the world. The desperate proposal. Harrison Cole stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his ranch office, surveying the vast expanse of prime Texas grassland that had made him one of the wealthiest cattle ranchers in the state. At 52, he possessed the kind of financial success that most people could only dream about, but he also carried the profound loneliness that often accompanied great wealth when it wasn't balanced by meaningful human connections. The monthly cattle auction in Austin was both business necessity and social obligation for ranchers throughout Central Texas, though Harrison's participation had become increasingly perfunctory over the years. His operation was so large and well-established that he no longer needed to buy breeding stock through public markets, but his presence at these events was expected by the ranching community. On this particular Saturday morning in late October, the auction barn was filled with the familiar sights and sounds of rural commerce. Harrison had completed his token purchases and was preparing to leave when he noticed an unusual commotion near the smaller livestock ring where sheep and goats were typically sold. A crowd had gathered around a middle-aged Hispanic man who appeared to be engaged in some kind of heated negotiation with several potential buyers. The man, who looked to be in his 40s with the weathered hands of someone who worked outdoors for a living, was speaking in a mixture of Spanish and heavily accented English to anyone who would listen. Standing beside him, clearly uncomfortable and trying to remain invisible, was a teenage girl who couldn't have been more than 15 or 16 years old. Harrison's initial instinct was to mind his own business and continue toward the parking lot. But something about the girl's expression, a mixture of terror, shame, and desperate resignation, made him pause and move closer to overhear what was being discussed. "She is good worker," the man was saying to a group of ranchers and farmers who had gathered around him. "Very smart, speaks English and Spanish, can cook, clean, take care of animals. She finished high school early, very responsible girl." "What exactly are you proposing here, Martinez?" asked one of the ranchers, a man Harrison recognized but had never spoken to personally. "I need $8,000 today," the man replied, his voice carrying the desperation of someone who had exhausted all other options. "My debts, they are too much, and the bank will take my farm if I don't pay. Sophia is my only daughter, but she's old enough to work and take care of herself. I am offering her services to anyone who will pay what I need." Harrison felt his stomach clench as he began to understand what he was witnessing. The man was essentially trying to sell his daughter's labor to pay off debts that were threatening his livelihood. "Services?" another voice called out from the crowd. "What kind of services are we talking about here?" "These household work, ranch work, whatever is needed," Martinez replied. But Harrison could see the shame in his eyes and the way his daughter recoiled at the implications of the conversation. Harrison looked at the girl, Sophia, her father had called her, and saw someone who was trying desperately to maintain her dignity in a situation that was designed to strip away every shred of human worth. She was beautiful in the way that young women often are when they possess both intelligence and character. But more than her appearance, it was her bearing that caught Harrison's attention. Despite the humiliation of being discussed like livestock, she held herself with quiet pride and kept her eyes fixed on some point in the distance. "Martinez," Harrison said, stepping forward and speaking loudly enough for his voice to carry across the entire gathering. The crowd turned to look at him with surprise and curiosity, recognizing him as one of the most successful ranchers in the state. "Mr. Cole," Martinez replied, clearly recognizing Harrison's reputation even if they had never met personally. "I did not expect to see you at this auction today. I didn't expect to witness someone trying to sell their daughter like livestock," Harrison said bluntly, his words causing an uncomfortable silence to fall over the gathered crowd. Martinez's face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "You don't understand my situation, Mr. Cole. I have tried everything else. The bank will foreclose on my farm next week if I don't find the money, and Sophia will be homeless anyway. At least this way, she will have a place to work and live." "And what does Sophia think about this arrangement?" Harrison asked, directing his question to the girl herself rather than her father. For the first time since the conversation had begun, Sophia looked directly at someone who was speaking to her. Her dark eyes met Harrison's, and he saw intelligence, fear, and a desperate hope that someone might recognize her as a human being rather than a commodity to be traded. "I think," she said quietly, her English precise despite her obvious nervousness, "that there must be another way to solve my father's problems that doesn't involve treating me like property." Her words carried across the auction barn with surprising clarity, and Harrison could see that several of the men who'd been considering her father's proposal were beginning to look uncomfortable with the entire situation. "You're absolutely right," Harrison said to Sophia, then turned to address her father. "Martinez, what you're proposing here is not just morally wrong, it's potentially illegal. You cannot sell another human being's labor without their consent." "Then what do you suggest?" Martinez shot back, desperation making his voice louder and more defiant. "You think I want to do this? You think I haven't tried every bank, every lending company, every friend and relative I have? $8,000 might not be much money to you, Mr. Cole, but it's the difference between my family having a home or living on the street." Harrison looked around at the crowd that had gathered to witness this confrontation, noting the mixture of discomfort, curiosity, and predatory interest on various faces. Some of these men had clearly been prepared to take advantage of Martinez's desperation. "I have a different proposal," Harrison said, pulling out his checkbook and a pen. "I'll pay your $8,000, Martinez. But Sophia doesn't go with anyone as property or indentured labor. Instead, she comes to work for me as a paid employee with full rights and protections." The crowd erupted in surprised murmurs and heated discussions. This was not how anyone had expected this situation to resolve itself. Martinez looked stunned, uncertain whether to be grateful or suspicious of this unexpected offer. "Why would you do this?" Martinez asked. "You don't even know us." Harrison looked at Sophia, who was staring at him with a mixture of hope and disbelief, then back at her father. "Because no human being should be reduced to a transaction designed to solve other people's problems. Because Sophia deserves the chance to build her own future rather than being sold to pay someone else's debts. And because I have the resources to help, which makes it my responsibility to act." "But what would you expect from her?" Martinez asked. "What kind of work?" "That's between Sophia and me," Harrison replied firmly. "But I can guarantee that whatever arrangement we make will be based on mutual respect, fair compensation, and her right to leave any time she chooses." Sophia stepped forward, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "Mr. Cole, I accept your offer. And I give you my word that I will work harder and more honestly than any employee you've ever had. Ubeam, as Harrison wrote out a check for $8,000, an amount that represented pocket change to him, but salvation for the Martinez family, he realized that his carefully ordered, solitary life was about to become considerably more complicated. But looking at the relief and gratitude in Sophia's eyes, he also realized that some complications were worth embracing if they meant preserving human dignity and offering someone a chance at a better future. The crowd slowly dispersed, some people shaking their heads in disapproval at Harrison's intervention, others nodding in respect for his moral courage. But Harrison wasn't thinking about public opinion as he led Sophia toward his truck. He was thinking about how to help a young woman rebuild her life after experiencing the ultimate betrayal by the person who should have protected her. As they drove away from the auction barn toward Harrison's ranch, Sophia sat quietly in the passenger seat, processing the fact that her life had just taken an entirely unexpected turn. She had prepared herself for the worst possible outcome of her father's desperate scheme, but she had never imagined that a stranger would step forward to offer her not just rescue, but genuine opportunity and respect. "Mr. Cole," she said finally, "I need you to know that I will never forget what you did for me today, and I promise you won't regret giving me this chance." Harrison glanced at his unexpected passenger and felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose that extended beyond the boundaries of his own property and personal comfort. Helping Sophia was going to change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine, but for the first time in a long time, change felt like something to embrace rather than resist. Discovering worth, the first month of Sophia's presence at Harrison's ranch was marked by mutual discovery as both of them navigated the complexities of their unusual arrangement. Harrison had provided Sophia with a comfortable apartment in the guest house on his property, ensuring she had privacy and independence while remaining close enough to participate in whatever work they determined would be most beneficial. What Harrison discovered during those first weeks was that Sophia Martinez possessed capabilities that extended far beyond anything her father's desperate auction could have conveyed. She was fluent in 3 languages, had completed high school at 16 with honors, and demonstrated an intuitive understanding of business operations that impressed even Harrison's most experienced managers. Her willingness to tackle any task, combined with her natural intelligence and strong work ethic, made Harrison realize that her father's financial crisis had nearly cost the world a person of exceptional potential. Sophia, for her part, threw herself into her new responsibilities with the determination of someone trying to prove their worth after experiencing profound humiliation. She quickly mastered the complex computer systems that Harrison used to manage his vast operation, reorganized filing systems that had become unwieldy over years of rapid expansion, and began identifying inefficiencies in ranch operations that more experienced employees had overlooked. But beneath her professional competence, Harrison could see the emotional toll that recent events had taken on her. She rarely spoke unless directly asked a question, maintained the kind of hyper-vigilant awareness that suggested someone who had learned not to trust her environment, and seemed determined to make herself indispensable, as if her value as a person depended entirely on her usefulness as an employee. "Sophia," Harrison said one evening as they reviewed the day's work in his office, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Mr. Cole," she replied, setting down the financial reports she had been organizing with characteristic precision. "What did you want to do with your life before your father's financial problems changed everything? What were your plans, your dreams?" Sophia was quiet for a moment, as if the question had awakened memories she had been trying to suppress. "I wanted to study business administration and agricultural economics. I thought maybe I could help small farmers and ranchers like my father learn better management practices, help them avoid the kind of financial mistakes that led to our situation." "That's a worthwhile goal," Harrison said. What stopped you from pursuing it? Money, Sophia replied simply. My father spent everything we had trying to save the farm, and then borrowed against everything we might have in the future. There was no money for college, no way to get loans with our credit destroyed, no family members who could help. Harrison studied her face, noting the way she talked about her father's choices with more sadness than anger, despite the fact that those choices had nearly resulted in her being sold like property. Sophia, what would you say if I told you that working for me could include pursuing your education? That part of your compensation package could be college tuition and the time needed to attend classes. Sophia's eyes widened with surprise and something that looked like cautious hope. Mr. Cole, I don't understand. Why would you invest that kind of money in someone you barely know? Because, Harrison said, I've spent the past month watching you work, and I've seen what you're capable of when given the opportunity to use your talents. Investing in your education isn't charity, it's good business. Someone with your intelligence and work ethic, properly trained in business and agricultural management, could be invaluable to an operation like this. But what if I take your money for education and then leave to work somewhere else? Harrison smiled, recognizing in her question the kind of practical thinking that would serve her well in business. Then I'll have the satisfaction of knowing I helped someone achieve their potential, and you'll have the skills and knowledge to build whatever kind of life you choose. Either way, it's a good investment. Over the following weeks, their relationship began to evolve from employer and employee towards something that resembled mentorship. Harrison enrolled Sophia in online business courses through the University of Texas, arranged for her to audit agricultural economics classes at the local community college, and began involving her in high-level management decisions that gave her practical experience to complement her academic learning. But it was during a routine business meeting with Harrison's banker that Sophia truly demonstrated the value of her unique perspective and cultural background. Mr. Cole, said Frank Morrison, the senior loan officer who had handled Harrison's business for over a decade, we're seeing increasing default rates among small agricultural operations in this region. The bank is considering tightening lending standards, which might affect some of your smaller suppliers and contractors. What kind of default rates are we talking about? Harrison asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer would be troubling. Nearly 30% among Hispanic-owned farms and ranches, Morrison replied. These operations tend to be family-owned, undercapitalized, and managed using traditional methods that don't adapt well to modern market pressures. Sophia, who had been quietly taking notes during the meeting, looked up with an expression that Harrison had learned to recognize as indicating she had something important to contribute. Mr. Morrison, she said respectfully, may I ask what kind of support services the bank provides to help these borrowers succeed rather than just monitoring them for failure? Morrison looked surprised by the question, as if the idea of helping borrowers succeed was a novel concept. We provide standard loan documentation and require basic financial reporting, of course. Nice, but do you provide education about modern agricultural practices? Help with business plan development, assistance with marketing and distribution, or connections to resources that could help these operations become more profitable and sustainable? Those aren't typically banking services, Morrison said, though his tone suggested he was beginning to understand Sophia's point. Which might explain why your default rates are so high, Sophia replied. These farmers and ranchers aren't failing because they're lazy or incompetent. They're failing because they lack access to the knowledge, resources, and support systems that larger operations take for granted. Harrison felt a surge of pride as he watched Sophia articulate insights that his banker had apparently never considered, despite years of experience in agricultural lending. What are you suggesting? Morrison asked, clearly intrigued despite himself. I'm suggesting that Mr. Cole's operation could partner with the bank to provide the support services that would help these smaller operations succeed, Sophia said, her confidence growing as she outlined her vision. Mr. Cole has the expertise, the resources, and the infrastructure to offer training, mentorship, and market access to struggling agricultural businesses. And what would Mr. Cole get out of such an arrangement? Morrison asked. A more stable supplier base, reduced competition from desperate competitors who drive down prices, and the satisfaction of strengthening the entire agricultural community rather than just maximizing his own profits, Sophia replied. Harrison looked at the young woman who had articulated a vision for agricultural development that was both financially sound and socially responsible, and realized that his investment in her education was already paying dividends he hadn't anticipated. Sophia, he said, I want you to develop a detailed proposal for this partnership program. Include cost projections, expected outcomes, and implementation timelines. If you can make the numbers work, we'll present it to the bank's board of directors. As they drove back to the ranch after the meeting, Harrison found himself thinking about how completely Sophia had changed his perspective on his role in the community. For years, he had viewed his success as an individual achievement that he had earned through hard work and smart decisions. But Sophia's insights had made him realize that his success was built on the foundation of a broader agricultural community, and that he had both the opportunity and the responsibility to strengthen that foundation. Sophia, he said as they pulled into the ranch driveway, I want you to know that what happened in that meeting today, the way you identified problems and proposed solutions, that's exactly the kind of thinking that will make you successful in whatever career you choose. Mr. Cole, Sophia replied, everything I know about business and agriculture I've learned from watching you and studying the systems you've built. You've given me opportunities to develop skills and knowledge that I never would have had access to otherwise. But you've also given me something I didn't realize I was missing, Harrison said. You've reminded me that success without purpose is just accumulation, and that the most valuable investments are the ones we make in other people's potential. As they settled into their evening routine, both Harrison and Sophia realized that their arrangement had evolved far beyond the emergency intervention that had brought them together. They were building something that resembled a genuine partnership, one that honored Sophia's intelligence and ambition while providing Harrison with the sense of purpose and connection he had been missing for years. Building something bigger. 6 months after Sophia's arrival at the ranch, their agricultural development partnership had evolved from a theoretical proposal into a functioning program that was attracting attention from universities, government agencies, and agricultural organizations throughout Texas. What had begun as Sophia's insight about bank lending practices had grown into the Southwest Agricultural Mentorship Initiative, a comprehensive program that paired successful large-scale operations with struggling small farms to provide training, resources, and market access. Harrison had initially approached the program as a way to give Sophia practical experience in program development and community outreach. But he quickly discovered that her vision for agricultural development extended far beyond anything he had imagined possible. She had designed curricula for farm management training, established partnerships with equipment manufacturers to provide discounted machinery to program participants, and created marketing cooperatives that allowed small farmers to access premium markets that had previously been available only to large operations. But the program's success was also creating unexpected challenges that tested both Harrison's commitment to community development and Sophia's ability to navigate the complex politics of agricultural business. Mr. Cole, said Patricia Whitman, the president of the Texas Cattlemen's Association, during a meeting in Harrison's office, we need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about your mentorship program. Harrison looked up from the financial reports that Sophia had prepared, showing the program's impact on participating farms, noting the formal tone in Patricia's voice that suggested this was not going to be a friendly conversation. What kind of concerns? He asked. gesturing for Patricia to sit down while Sophia continued working at the computer station she had established in the corner of his office. Some of our members are worried that you're creating unfair competition by providing resources and support to operations that should succeed or fail based on their own merits. There's also concern that you're undermining market prices by helping inefficient farms become more competitive. Harrison felt a familiar frustration rising in his chest. Patricia, these farmers aren't failing because they lack merit. They're failing because they lack access to the same advantages that larger operations have always taken for granted. But that's how the market works, Patricia replied. Efficient operations succeed, inefficient ones fail, and the industry becomes stronger overall. When you interfere with that natural selection process, you distort the market and potentially harm everyone. Sophia looked up from her computer, clearly following the conversation despite appearing to focus on her work. Harrison could see that she wanted to contribute to the discussion, but was uncertain about whether her input would be welcome in what was obviously a high-level political conversation. "Sophia," Harrison said, "you've studied the economic data more thoroughly than anyone. What does the evidence show about the program's impact on market conditions?" Sophia saved her work and turned to face Patricia with the kind of calm confidence that Harrison had watched her develop over the past months. "Ms. Whitman," she said respectfully, "the data actually shows that the mentorship program is strengthening market conditions rather than distorting them. When small farms fail, their land is often sold to developers or converted to non-agricultural uses, which reduces the overall supply of productive farmland. When these operations become sustainable, they increase total agricultural output and create more stable supplier relationships for everyone." Patricia studied Sophia with careful attention, clearly reassessing her assumptions about who was actually driving the mentorship program. "And what about the concern that you're subsidizing inefficient operations?" "We're not subsidizing inefficiency," Sophia replied. "We're providing education, training, and market access that allows small operations to become as efficient as larger ones. The program participants are required to meet specific performance benchmarks, and those who don't improve are removed from the program. But surely you can see how this might be perceived as a wealthy rancher buying goodwill and political influence by helping his potential competitors," Patricia said, directing her comment toward Harrison, but clearly hoping to provoke a response from Sophia. "Ms. Whitman," Sophia said, her voice carrying a slight edge that suggested Patricia had crossed a line. "Mr. Cole's ranch is so large and well-established that small family farms aren't really his competitors. His real competition comes from other large operations and corporate agricultural businesses. The mentorship program is actually creating a stronger supply base and more stable market conditions that benefit everyone." Harrison watched this exchange with growing admiration for Sophia's ability to remain calm and factual while addressing what were essentially political attacks disguised as business concerns. After Patricia left, clearly frustrated by her inability to find obvious flaws in either the program's design or Sophia's explanations, Harrison and Sophia sat in his office processing what had essentially been an attack on their work. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," Harrison said. "Patricia and some of the other association members have been looking for ways to undermine the mentorship program since it started gaining attention." "Why?" Sophia asked. "If the program is actually helping the agricultural community, why would they oppose it?" Harrison considered her question, recognizing that it went to the heart of complex political and economic relationships that he had been navigating for decades. "Because," he said finally, "some people benefit from the current system of winners and losers, and they're threatened by anything that might change those dynamics. Large operations like mine have advantages that come from scale, capital access, and political connections. When smaller operations gain access to some of those same advantages, it changes the competitive landscape. But you're a large operation, and you support the program. Why are you different?" Harrison looked at the young woman who had fundamentally changed his understanding of success and responsibility. "Because you taught me that success without purpose is just accumulation, and that the most valuable investments are the ones that create opportunities for other people to succeed. I've discovered that helping others achieve their potential is more satisfying than maximizing my own profits." "And what if the association members try to sabotage the program?" "Then we'll find other ways to provide the support these farmers need," Harrison said. "Sophia, what we're building here is bigger than any individual program or partnership. We're proving that agricultural development can be both economically sustainable and socially responsible." As they returned to their work, both Harrison and Sophia realized that their partnership had evolved beyond mentorship into something that resembled genuine collaboration. Sophia was no longer just learning from Harrison's experience. She was contributing insights and innovations that were making their shared work more effective and impactful. The program that had begun as a way to help Sophia develop practical business skills had become a model for agricultural development that was being studied and replicated throughout the region. But more importantly for both of them personally, their work together had created the kind of purpose and meaning that neither had experienced before. A legacy worth building. 2 years after Harrison had stopped Sophia's father from selling her at the auction, their agricultural development work had grown into something neither could have imagined. The Southwest Agricultural Mentorship Initiative now served over 200 small farms and ranches across 5 states, had facilitated over $50 million in sustainable lending, and had become a model program studied by agricultural economists throughout North America. Sophia had completed her bachelor's degree in agricultural economics with highest honors, while simultaneously earning an MBA through an executive program. But more than her academic achievements, it was her practical experience in developing and managing complex agricultural partnerships that had attracted attention from major universities and international development organizations. On this particular morning in late September, exactly 2 years after their first meeting, Harrison stood in his office reviewing correspondence that would mark another major transition in their partnership. Sophia had been offered a position as Director of Agricultural Development for the Inter-American Development Bank, a role that would allow her to apply the lessons learned from their work in Texas to rural development projects throughout Latin America. "Harrison," Sophia said, joining him at the windows that overlooked the ranch where their partnership had begun, "I've been thinking about the bank's offer." "And?" Harrison asked, though he suspected he already knew her decision. "And I think I need to take it. The opportunity to work on agricultural development at an international level, to help farming communities throughout the Americas, it's exactly what all of our work here has been preparing me for." Harrison nodded, feeling a complex mixture of pride in Sophia's achievements and sadness at the prospect of losing the partnership that had given his life more meaning than any of his previous business successes. "You're absolutely right to take it," he said. "This is the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a lifetime, and you've earned it through your work and dedication. But I'm worried about what happens to the mentorship program when I leave. You've built something important here, something that's making a real difference in people's lives." Harrison smiled, recognizing in her concern the same commitment to community development that had characterized all of their work together. "Sophia, the program will continue and grow because the model we've developed is sound and the need is real. But more importantly, what we've built here was never about any individual person. It was about proving that sustainable development is possible when people with resources are willing to invest in other people's potential." And then, as the celebration unfolded throughout the afternoon, Harrison found himself reflecting on how completely his understanding of success and responsibility had been transformed by his partnership with Sophia. The ranch that had once been his personal kingdom had become a center for collaborative development work that was strengthening agricultural communities throughout the region. "Harrison," Sophia said, as they walked together through the pastures where their partnership had taken shape, "I need you to know that everything good in my life started the moment you decided to intervene in that auction and refused to let my father sell me like property. Ms. Sophia, Harrison replied, you've taught me that the most valuable investments are the ones that create opportunities for other people to succeed, and that real wealth comes from building relationships and partnerships rather than just accumulating assets. 2 years ago, Sophia continued, my father tried to sell me to pay his debts, and I thought my life was over before it had really begun. 2 years ago, Harrison replied, I was a wealthy man living in isolation, convinced that my success was an individual achievement that I had earned entirely through my own efforts. And now I know that success without purpose is just accumulation, and that the most meaningful investments are the ones that help other people discover and develop their own potential. Harrison said, you've shown me that real wealth comes from creating opportunities for others to succeed. Their partnership had created something that would endure long after their daily collaboration had ended. The programs they had developed together would continue to serve agricultural communities. The model they had created would be replicated in other regions, and the lessons they had learned about sustainable development would influence policy and practice for years to come. But perhaps most importantly, their relationship had proven that the most valuable transactions are often the ones that can't be measured in traditional financial terms. When Harrison had intervened to prevent Sophia from being sold to pay her father's debts, he had made an investment that had transformed both their lives and created value that extended far beyond anything either could have achieved alone. The young woman, who had nearly been sold like property, had become a leader in international agricultural development. The wealthy rancher, who had lived in isolation, had discovered that his greatest legacy would not be the size of his operation, but the number of people whose potential he had helped to develop. Their story had begun with an act of moral courage that prevented a terrible injustice, but it had become something much larger, a model for how people with resources can invest in human potential in ways that create lasting value for entire communities. This inspiring story of Harrison and Sophia reminds us that true wealth comes not from what we accumulate, but from what we help others achieve. Their journey shows us that moral courage, combined with generous investment in human potential, can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more inspiring stories about the power of investing in people's potential. Let us know in the comments what city you're watching from and share your thoughts about how we can all find ways to help others develop their capabilities. Remember, we all have something valuable to offer others, and sometimes the most important investment we can make is in someone else's dreams and potential. Until next time, keep believing in the transformative power of human dignity and opportunity.